My name is Julian. I am 38 years old, and I work as a residential HVAC technician, crawling through attics and basements to fix air conditioners for people who never look me in the eye. Last Saturday, my twin sons turned 7 years old, and my ex-wife threw them a party that looked like a royal coronation. I stood outside the 12-foot iron gates of her new husband's estate while the rain soaked through my work shirt. Through the bars, I could see the celebration on the massive front lawn. There were caterers in white tuxedos and a string quartet playing soft music. Then I saw him. Brad, the hedge fund manager who replaced me. He was leading 2 Shetland ponies across the grass. My sons Leo and Lucas were screaming with pure joy as they climbed onto the saddles. They looked like little princes. And there I was, their real father, clutching a wet plastic bag with 2 Lego sets I had saved up for 3 weeks to buy. Brad gave them living, breathing horses. I gave them plastic bricks. But as I watched Brad lift my sons onto those saddles and accept their hugs, he had no idea that the blood running through their veins was about to demand a debt he could not pay, a debt that his millions could not fix. I pressed the intercom button on the brick pillar. I did not expect to be let in, but I had to try. I just wanted to see them for 5 minutes. I wanted to hand them the boxes and tell them I loved them. The gate did not open. Instead, the front door of the mansion opened and Vanessa walked out. She was flanked by a private security guard who rested his hand on his belt like I was a threat. Vanessa walked all the way down the driveway to the gate. She wore a white silk dress that probably cost more than my entire truck. She did not open the gate. She stood on the dry side under a large umbrella held by the guard and looked at me through the bars. She did not look at my face. She looked straight at my heavy work boots, which were stained with grease from a 12-hour shift. She looked at the cheap plastic bag in my hand. I tried to speak. I told her I just wanted to give the boys their gifts. I told her I would not make a scene. Vanessa laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that cut worse than the freezing rain. She signaled to the guard to crack the gate open just enough for her to reach out. She snatched the bag from my hand. I thought she was going to take it to them. Instead, she turned and walked over to the large industrial trash bin by the guard booth. She dropped my presents inside like they were contaminated waste. She dusted her hands off and turned back to me. Her face was twisted in disgust. "Look at you, Julian. You smell like Freon and sweat. Do you really want to walk in there and embarrass them?" Leo and Lucas tell their friends at their private school that their father is Brad. They say he is a director of a global fund. They do not tell people their father is a grease monkey who crawls through ventilation ducts for minimum wage. You make them ashamed, Julian. You are a stain on their new life. Leave now before I have security call the police for trespassing. She signaled the guard, and the heavy iron gate buzzed shut in my face. I stood there for a moment watching the rain turn the driveway into a river. The music from the party drifted over the wall. I could hear my sons laughing. They were laughing at something Brad said. I turned around and walked back to my rusted Ford pickup parked down the street because the security team would not let me park in the driveway. I sat in the cab, and the smell of old coffee and cold metal felt like a prison. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from Vanessa. I unlocked the screen and saw a photo. It was a legal document, a petition to terminate parental rights based on abandonment and lack of financial support. The text underneath made my heart stop beating. It read, "Stop trying. The boys have forgotten you. They call Brad Dad now. Legally and socially, you are a stranger to them. Do not come back." I stared at the screen until it went black. I slammed my fist into the steering wheel until my knuckles bled. I was their father. I was the one who held them first when they were born. I was the one who cut the umbilical cords. But in America, money buys titles, and money buys fathers. I was just a ghost in a work uniform. I started the engine and drove away into the rain, telling myself I had to let them go if I wanted them to have a good life. I did not know that 3 years later the life Vanessa bought them would start to crumble, and I would be the only one holding the cure. 3 years passed like a gray blur of copper pipes and rooftop ventilation units. I threw myself into work because it was the only way to silence the silence in my apartment. I took double shifts on Christmas and worked weekends on Thanksgiving. I told myself I was building a future just in case they ever came back, but deep down, I knew Vanessa had won. She had erased me. Then came the Tuesday that shattered my world. I was sitting in a roadside diner eating a cold sandwich when the news flashed across the overhead television. It was a local broadcast highlighting a charity gala. The headline read, "Local billionaire Brad Sterling launches foundation to save son." I dropped my sandwich. The camera zoomed in on a photo of Leo. My Leo. But he did not look like the vibrant boy I remembered. He was pale and his eyes were sunken, and he had lost all his hair. The news anchor said the 7-year-old heir was fighting aggressive acute leukemia, and the family was desperately searching for a bone marrow match. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My son was dying while I was fixing air conditioners. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and dialed Vanessa. It rang once and then went straight to voicemail. I called again. This time, it did not even ring. The operator voice said the number you have reached is not accepting calls from this number. She had blocked me. Even with our son on his deathbed, she decided I was not important enough to know. I threw a $20 bill on the table and ran to my truck. I did not care about the speed limits. I did not care about the red lights. I just needed to get to St. Jude Hospital before it was too late. I skidded my truck to a halt in front of the emergency entrance, but security was already there. It was like a fortress. Brad had turned the hospital wing into a private bunker. I tried to push past the front desk, but 2 large men in dark suits stepped in front of me. Behind them, I saw Brad coming out of the elevator. He looked tired but impeccable in a custom suit. He saw me, and his face did not show relief or sadness. It showed annoyance. He walked over to the security line like he was inspecting a nuisance. I begged him. I told him I heard the news and I wanted to help. I told him to let me see Leo. Brad let out a short, dry laugh that chilled my blood. He looked me up and down with that same arrogance he had at the birthday party 3 years ago. "You want to help?" he asked loud enough for the nurses to hear. "Are you here to ask for a handout, Julian, because this is a medical crisis, not a soup kitchen?" I told him I was here to offer my marrow. I told him I could be a match. Brad stepped closer and lowered his voice to a venomous whisper. "Do not be delusional. The doctors are screening candidates from the top universities and the best genetic pools. My son has elite DNA. He needs a match from a winner, not a biological failure who fixes toilets for a living. We have already tested ourselves, and we are not matches, but we will find someone superior. Go home, Julian. You are contaminating the sterile environment." He turned his back on me and signaled the guards to remove me. As they dragged me out, I screamed that I was his father, but my voice was drowned out by the automatic doors sliding shut. I sat on the curb outside the emergency room feeling the cold concrete seep into my bones, but I could not leave. I watched the lights on the 4th floor where the VIP suites were. Hours passed. Then the atmosphere shifted. I saw nurses running. I saw a crash cart being rushed into the elevator. The flashing red lights of the ambulance bay reflected off the glass. Something was wrong. I used my phone to scan the police scanner app I used for work. I heard the dispatch code for cardiac arrest in the pediatric wing. My blood ran cold. I knew the layout of this hospital better than the doctors did because I had installed the HVAC system here 5 years ago. I ran around to the back of the building near the loading dock. There was a service entry for maintenance that was usually left unlatched for the night shift smokers. I slipped inside. I did not take the elevator. I took the service stairs, climbing 4 flights, 2 steps at a time until my lungs burned. I came out in a utility closet down the hall from the VIP wing. I could hear screaming. It was Vanessa. She was not crying soft, motherly tears. She was shrieking at a doctor, blaming them, threatening to sue them if they did not fix this. She was making it about her. I waited for the nurses to rush toward her voice, and then I slipped into the main corridor. I found the office of the head oncologist, Dr. Mercer. The door was open. She was sitting at her desk, looking defeated with her head in her hands. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. She jumped up, ready to call security. I held up my hands. My work shirt was sweaty and I looked like a madman, but my voice was steady. I am Julian. I am the biological father of the boy in room 402. I know Brad and Vanessa said I do not exist, but I am here. Please. I dropped to my knees right there on the hospital floor. Test me. I do not care what they say. Just take my blood and save him. Dr. Mercer looked at the security camera blinking in the corner of her office, and then she looked back at me kneeling on the linoleum. She saw a man who had broken into a hospital wing not to steal drugs or cause harm, but to beg for the chance to bleed for his child. She let out a long breath and reached for her tablet. She told me that legally she could lose her license for this because the court order was clear about my lack of rights. She said she could not put my name on the official file yet. She would process me as John Doe, an anonymous emergency donor. If I was a match, she would deal with the lawyers later. If I was not a match, I would leave and never come back. I agreed to everything. She led me into a small procedure room attached to her office. She did not use anesthesia because there was no time to wait for it to take effect. She inserted the large needle into my hip bone to extract the marrow sample for the advanced HLA typing. It felt like a hot iron rod was being driven into the center of my skeleton. I bit down on a leather strap she gave me until my teeth creaked, but I did not scream. I did not flinch. Every ounce of pain I felt was a reminder that I was still his father. While the nurse bandaged me up, I walked to the observation window. Through the glass and the blinds, I could see Leo. He was hooked up to so many machines that I could barely see his small body. His chest was rising and falling in a jagged rhythm. I placed my hand on the cold glass. I whispered to him to hold on just a little longer because help was coming. I was told to wait in the sub-waiting room down the hall while the rapid sequencing took place. It was a sterile gray room filled with old magazines and the smell of antiseptic. I sat in the corner chair trying to ignore the throbbing ache in my hip. 10 minutes later, the double doors swung open and Vanessa marched in, followed closely by Brad. They did not see me in the shadows, or maybe they just did not care. They were too busy tearing each other apart. I thought I would hear parents mourning their dying child or praying for a miracle. Instead, I heard a business negotiation gone wrong. Brad was pacing back and forth, checking his gold watch every 30 seconds. He was furious. He hissed at Vanessa that this situation was becoming a PR nightmare. He said the board of directors was calling him every 5 minutes asking if the heir to the sterling fortune was going to survive. He said if Leo died, the stock price would dip and the investors would panic about the family's stability. He looked at his dying son not as a person, but as a depreciating asset. Vanessa was no better. She was fixing her makeup in the reflection of a framed poster. She told Brad to stop worrying about the money and start worrying about her image. She said she had already canceled her appearance at the charity gala, and if Leo did not make it, she would have to play the grieving mother for months, which would ruin her social calendar. I sat there, gripping the armrests of my chair so hard the plastic cracked. They were monsters. My son was fighting for every breath in the next room, and they were worried about stocks and parties. I realized then that Leo and Lucas were never children to them. They were accessories. They were props used to complete the picture of a perfect power couple. Down in the pathology lab, the mood was very different. Dr. Mercer was standing in front of the high-resolution monitors as the sequencer spit out the genetic data. She rubbed her eyes and took a sip of cold coffee. She expected to see a mismatch or maybe a partial match if we were lucky. She looked at the screen. She blinked. She set her coffee down and typed a command to run the sequence again. The machine whirred and produced the same result. Dr. Mercer called over the chief pathologist. He looked at the data and frowned. He adjusted his glasses and leaned in closer. He told her to run it a third time using a different reagent. They ran it again. By now, 3 other specialists had gathered around the monitor. The room went completely silent. There was no sound of machines beeping or people talking, just the hum of the computer fan. The result was flashing on the screen in bright green letters. It was a result that should have been straightforward, but the genetic markers told a story that made no sense. It was medically impossible based on the charts they had on file. Dr. Mercer printed the results. Her hands were shaking slightly as she pulled the paper from the tray. She looked at her colleagues, and they all nodded slowly, confirming what they were seeing. She took a deep breath, smoothed out her white coat, and walked out of the lab. The automatic doors to the waiting room slid open with a soft hiss. Dr. Mercer stepped out holding a single clipboard. Her face was pale. It was the kind of pale you see on people who have just witnessed a ghost. The chatter between Brad and Vanessa stopped instantly. Brad stepped forward, his aggressive demeanor returning in full force. He demanded to know why it was taking so long. He asked if they had found a donor in the elite database yet. He spoke to her like she was his employee. Dr. Mercer did not answer him immediately. She did not even look at him. She walked past him and stood in the center of the room. She turned her head and her eyes locked onto mine in the corner. There was a profound sadness in her look, but also a deep respect. Then she turned her head slowly toward Vanessa. The professional mask she usually wore had slipped. Her eyes narrowed. The concern she had shown earlier for a grieving mother was gone. It was replaced by something colder, something like disgust. She looked at Vanessa the way one looks at a disease. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out. Brad stepped between them and shouted, asking for the damn results. Dr. Mercer finally looked at him, but she did not speak to him. She lifted the clipboard and pointed a finger at the genetic chart. She opened her mouth to speak, and the truth she was about to unleash was heavier than the building itself. Dr. Mercer took a step closer to Brad and held the clipboard against her chest like a shield. Her voice was steady and loud enough for everyone in the waiting room to hear. She announced that they had found a donor. She said the search was over because they had located a perfect 100% match. Brad let out a sigh of relief and immediately pulled out his phone, presumably to tweet the good news to his investors. He asked who it was and demanded to have the donor brought to the VIP wing immediately so they could expedite the process. Dr. Mercer did not look at her phone. She pointed a finger toward the corner where I was sitting. She said the donor is him. It is Julian. Brad froze with his thumb hovering over his screen. He looked at me and then let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. He asked if this was some kind of sick joke. He pointed at my dirty work boots and my stained shirt and asked how a man who fixes air conditioners could possibly be the genetic savior of his son. He called me a genetic dead end. He turned to Dr. Mercer and told her to check her machines because they were clearly broken. But Dr. Mercer interrupted him. Her voice was like ice. She said the machines were working perfectly. She said Julian is a perfect match because he is the biological father. But she said that was not the reason she had called the security team to stand by the doors. She said that during the high-resolution HLA typing they found a genetic anomaly. She said the results showed a biological impossibility based on the birth certificates and the medical history Vanessa had provided for the last 7 years. Vanessa started to shake. It began with her hands and then spread to her shoulders. She looked like she was vibrating. She took a step toward Dr. Mercer and her eyes were wide with panic. She demanded that the doctor stop talking immediately. She said this was a violation of her privacy and she would sue the hospital into bankruptcy if another word was spoken. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the clipboard from Dr. Mercer's hands, but the security guard who had been standing by the door stepped in. He caught Vanessa by the arm and held her back. She screamed at him to let her go, but he did not move. The room was thick with tension. Brad looked confused. He looked from his wife to the doctor and asked what was going on. He asked what kind of anomaly could possibly matter right now when his son was dying. Dr. Mercer adjusted her glasses. She looked at the paper one last time to be absolutely certain. Then she looked up and locked eyes with Vanessa. She raised the clipboard so the text faced the room. She delivered the 5 words that would burn the entire empire of lies to the ground. She said simply and clearly, "You are not the mother." The silence that followed was absolute. It was not just quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb goes off before the ringing in your ears starts. The nurses stopped typing. The receptionist stopped answering phones. Even the hum of the vending machine seemed to stop. Brad stood there with his mouth open. He blinked once and then twice. He shook his head as if trying to clear water from his ears. He asked what she meant. He pointed at Vanessa and said that was insane. He said he was there when the boys were born. He said he saw her pregnant belly. He said she gave birth to them, so she had to be the mother. Vanessa was sobbing now. Not the fake crying she did for sympathy, but real ugly, terrified sobbing. She collapsed into the plastic chair and covered her face with her hands. Dr. Mercer lowered the clipboard. She looked at Brad with a mix of pity and professional detachment. She said, "Giving birth does not make someone the biological mother." She said in cases of gestational surrogacy, a woman carries a fertilized egg that does not belong to her. She said that is what happened here. Dr. Mercer turned to the whiteboard on the wall and began to explain the science as if she were teaching a class. She said that Julian is the biological father without a doubt. His DNA makes up 50% of Leo and Lucas' genetic code, but the other 50% usually comes from the mother. She said when they ran the sequence against Vanessa's sample, there was 0 match, not a partial match. 0. She said the boy's DNA contained markers from an anonymous donor egg. She explained that biologically Vanessa was no more related to those boys than a stranger on the street. The room turned to look at Vanessa. She was curled up in the chair. Under the weight of the staring eyes, she finally cracked. She screamed that she had no choice. She confessed that she had been infertile since her 20s because of a botched procedure she had hidden from everyone. When she met me, she wanted to trap me because I was hardworking and she wanted a family to secure her status. She used my sperm and a bought egg from a clinic and had the embryo implanted. She never told me. She let me believe they were mine and hers. And when she left me for Brad, she knew she needed the kids to land him. She knew Brad wanted a family man image, so she paid a crooked lawyer to falsify the custody papers. She lied to the court and said I was just a sperm donor with no rights. She stole my children not just physically but legally by erasing my name. She looked up at Brad, her mascara running down her face, and said she did it for their future. She said she did it so they could be a family. But Brad was not looking at her. He was looking at the boys in the room through the glass and realizing that the woman standing next to him had built their entire marriage on a fraud. The silence in the waiting room shattered the moment Brad fully processed Dr. Mercer's words. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. For 3 years, he had been parading Leo and Lucas around his country club, telling everyone they were his stepsons and that they had the sterling stamp of approval. He had invested millions into their private schools and their trust funds, believing he was building a legacy with a woman who came from a good family. Now he realized he had been playing the role of a fool in a very expensive play. He looked at Vanessa, who was still curled in the chair, and the look in his eyes was not anger. It was pure hatred. He walked over to her, and for a second I thought he might kill her. Instead, he raised his hand and delivered a slap that echoed off the sterile walls. Vanessa screamed and fell back against the plastic seats. Brad stood over her, adjusting his cufflinks with a terrifying calmness. He told her that she was a fraud. He said that their prenuptial agreement had a very specific clause about material misrepresentation, and she had just violated it in the worst possible way. He told her that as of this moment she was cut off. No credit cards. No access to the penthouses. No legal team. He looked at the boys in the other room one last time and then turned his back on them. He said he did not pay for damaged goods that did not belong to him. He walked out of the emergency room without looking back, leaving his wife on the floor and the boys he called sons fighting for their lives alone. Vanessa watched him leave, and the reality of her situation crashed down on her. She had lost the ATM machine she called a husband. She looked around the room frantically, and her eyes landed on me. I was still standing in the corner in my dirty work clothes, but for the first time in years, she did not look at me with disgust. She looked at me like I was a life raft. She crawled across the floor toward me. She grabbed the hem of my jeans and started to beg. She told me she did it for us. She said she knew we were struggling back then, and she wanted to ensure the boys had a future I could not provide. She said she lied about the DNA because she was scared I would leave her if I knew she was barren. She tried to touch my hand. She said we could be a family again. She said now that Brad was gone, we could raise them together just like the old days. She said I was the only one who ever truly loved her. It was a pathetic performance. She was not crying for the children. She was crying because her safety net had been set on fire and she needed a place to land. I looked down at her, and I did not feel the anger I expected to feel. I felt pity. I pulled my leg away from her grasp and stood up straighter. I felt taller than I had in years. I looked her in the eye and told her the truth. I told her that she did not do this for the boys. She did this for herself. I told her that she treated children like currency to buy her way into a life she did not earn. I pointed to the door where Dr. Mercer was standing with 2 police officers who had just arrived. I told Vanessa that she did not just lie to me. She lied to the federal government. She forged legal documents to terminate my rights. She committed paternity fraud and medical fraud. I told her that family is not about who can buy the biggest ponies. It is about who shows up when the storm hits. And she was the storm. Dr. Mercer stepped forward and nodded to the officers. They approached Vanessa and pulled her up from the floor. As they clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists, she started screaming my name. She screamed that I was a nobody. She screamed that I could not raise them alone. I watched them drag her out of the hospital doors and into the back of a squad car. The lobby was quiet again. I turned to Dr. Mercer. She smiled for the first time that night. She told me it was time to save my son. The next 6 hours were a blur of needles and tubes and machines. They wheeled me into the operating room next to Leo. I lay there watching the clear bag of my marrow stem cells being hooked up to his IV line. It looked like blood, but to me it looked like life. I watched the first drops go down the tube and enter his small body. I closed my eyes and prayed. I prayed that my blood would be strong enough to fight the war inside him. I prayed that he would feel me there with him. When I woke up in the recovery room, my hip felt like it had been hit with a sledgehammer, but my heart felt light. Dr. Mercer came in and told me the transfusion went perfectly. She said now we just had to wait for the engraftment. For the next 3 weeks, I did not leave that hospital room. I slept in the chair next to his bed. When Leo and Lucas finally woke up and saw me, they did not ask for Brad. They asked for Dad. And for the first time in 3 years, I was the one who answered. 6 months later, the snow had melted and the spring sun was shining on the park near my new house. I sat on a wooden bench watching 2 healthy boys chasing a soccer ball across the green grass. Leo was still growing his hair back, but his cheeks were pink and his legs were strong. Lucas was laughing, trying to tackle his brother. I looked down at my hands. They were clean. No more grease under the fingernails. After the lawsuit against Vanessa and the settlement from the fraud case, I had enough money to open my own HVAC business. I wasn't rich like Brad. We didn't live in a mansion. We lived in a 4-bedroom house with a big backyard and a tire swing, but it was ours. I stood up and whistled, and both boys stopped playing and ran toward me. They tackled me in a bear hug that nearly knocked the wind out of me. I smelled the grass on their clothes and felt their hearts beating against my chest. Vanessa was serving 5 years in a federal prison for fraud. Brad was somewhere in Europe pretending none of this ever happened. But we were here. I realized then that the greatest revenge against those who looked down on you is not to destroy them. It is to survive them and thrive. I looked at my sons and smiled. They tried to buy you with ponies and mansions, I whispered to them. They tried to erase me with paper and ink, but they forgot the most important rule of nature. You can paint over the truth, but you cannot change what is inside. I might not be able to give my sons a trust fund worth millions, but I gave them something Brad never could. I gave them life, twice.